Well, thanks for the opportunity to provide you with an update to Take Back Manufacturing. First, I will introduce myself and then provide an overview of our new book and also the current outlook. And I will present first, and then it will be open for questions and answers. Now, I've been involved in the manufacturing industry for a very long time, and in my career, I've played many roles: manufacturing engineer and manager, director of operations, an early lean practitioner, and a business improvement consultant and co-author of an early textbook on lean thinking. I've been very involved with a wide range of manufacturing industries in many different countries, including running operations in Mexico and setting up and managing supply chains and building a manufacturing capability in China. I'm past chair of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, and that's where we formed the TBM advocacy group in 2011. I lecture part-time at various colleges on advanced manufacturing, and I'm currently supporting organizations that are integrating their lean practices with the Industry 4.0 capability. My book is about the destruction of our manufacturing sectors in our Western societies, with significant loss of national prosperity, and why the imperative for Western economies must be to take back manufacturing. And more about me and what we do and about the TBM book at these websites. The book and our TBM advocacy group is currently assisting policymakers on both sides of the border as they plan the recovery of our industrial capability and future prosperity. Now, there are many reasons why I published the book now. Firstly, the perception that globalized manufacturing is a sustainable solution has changed recently. There are now concerns about the cost effectiveness and security of these global supply chains. Also, the increasing instability of the geopolitical environment has made the localization of an economy much more attractive than the past global view. And this has raised the level of political and citizen anxiety and provides an opportunity to have our message heard and allow us to advocate and assist with generating the correct political will and future policies. Next, we're going to explain the history of what happened to our manufacturing sectors. In the last 30 years, most Western governments, due to neoliberal economic ideology, subscribed to the liberalization of international trade on a global scale. And the economists termed this global free trade. Now, this dangerous ideology has allowed trade between nations with no controls on trade and trade balance. Due to this, we've relocated a huge part of our manufacturing capacity offshore to access this low-cost labor. It was herd behavior in a lot of ways, and it was certainly uncontrolled trade, and no one in authority questioned the long-term economic and ecological sustainability issues. Now, many of our local manufacturing sectors were either hollowed out or completely gutted, and some are totally destroyed and no longer exist as a local manufacturing capability. Now, maybe you worked in those sectors and will at first hand understand just how much we've lost. And from 2000 to 2017, we lost at least 20% of our manufacturing intensity, which means we lost a significant share of the value-adding contribution of manufacturing to our economy in terms of labor and associated support content. And this has had a significant impact on national prosperity. In Canada, the changes in these supply chains forced many small manufacturing plants to close. We lost about 25% of our manufacturing jobs. That's about 500,000 jobs. And the manufacturing employees displaced were, in many cases, forced to accept lower paying and more precarious service jobs. All of this dislocation of the core manufacturing population has created an ongoing skill shortage, further exacerbated by employers who have neither the budget or the time or stability to offer training programs to maintain a labor skill pool. So we've experienced at least a 10% decline in overall national productivity, with so much idle capacity both within the remaining manufacturing process and the inherent lower productivity of the service industries.
So this has also generated a much higher level of youth underemployment within the Canadian economy. The future of manufacturing in many parts of North America still looks grim, with Ontario and other parts of Canada and some states of America being termed an industrial rust belt.
Now, these are trade trends for our Canadian manufacturing economy, and it demonstrates the dismal outlook we've described so far. We are seeing a 10 times worsening of our trade deficit, at least a 20% decline in our domestic share of the manufacturing goods that we consume, and a 50% decline in our global share of manufacturing, and also an extreme trade imbalance with mainly emerging economies that are using labor arbitrage to export products. As mentioned, we continue to experience ongoing and significant trade imbalance. The US trade deficit, since globalization started, is consistently out of balance, with the cumulative imbalance now more than 50% of the total US GDP. The Canadian trade balance, with the assistance of resource exports, has traditionally been slightly positive, but it's now also trending negative due to the excessive imports from a lack of local manufacturing.
In Canada, due mainly to the elimination of our manufacturing sectors and the related loss of confidence in industrial investment and workforce development, we continue to experience ongoing declining productivity, yet we continue to add capacity with immigration at an alarming rate. To make things worse, in the same time frame, public sector employment was allowed to grow significantly. Now, this may have been a good ploy by our governments to make the unemployment numbers look better, but it has certainly further depressed national productivity. Debt is increasing on all fronts: government, local corporate, and household debt. And we're also facing rank inflation and terrible prosperity. Until recently, there has been no political will to reverse this very dark journey.
But there is some light at the end of this long dark tunnel. But first, we need to understand the problem some more. We decided to question the economics of onshore versus offshore as a business decision. This led us to undertake what could be called the biggest lean study of all time. It does generate some light at the end of the tunnel, as we will explain. Now, this global free trade approach is supported by globalized manufacturing, and this consists of using sea container technology to move materials from one country to another to access low-cost labor, and then moving the completed products to the final consumers someplace elsewhere using these waste machines. These container ships are the true waste machines of this global wealth transfer system. They add no value to the manufacturing process. There is no manufacturing done on these puppies. They just move non-value adding inventory around and consume very dirty bunker fuel. A 40-foot container docks in the USMCA trade region every 3 seconds. All the 90,000 container ships and the associated transportation devices and logistical processes across the globe are calculated to pollute more than 6 times all of the gasoline-driven cars on the planet.
Now, these sea container ships support these very long global supply chains. They are far from lean or green and attract significant non-value adding process steps, adding significant waste and operating costs to the overall supply chain. The past ultra low interest rates have enabled these long distance manufacturing activities that are inventory intensive and are now trending unsustainable as interest rates continue to rise to normal levels. Also, experience shows that enabling manufacturing in low cost countries is ecologically unsustainable. These third world emerging economies that manufacture for mature economies will operate far less efficient production systems and probably generate far greater resource waste and pollution, and provide higher health risks and generate far higher safety issues. So, globalization and free trade has been increasing pollution. So, overall, this model of globalizing manufacturing is deeply flawed and clearly unsustainable economically and ecologically. Now, the future alternative is a much more balanced economy using far shorter supply chains operating within localized lean and green trade blocks with less process steps that will have operating costs that are an order of magnitude lower than the wasteful global supply chains. And this will also significantly reduce the need for the wasteful and ecologically dangerous seagoing container ships and offer a far lower pollution footprint. This means trade will be far less sensitive to inventory so that interest rates can be normalized upward to better focus investment and prosperity. And this would also force a better balance of imports and also exports and enable the national populations to make much more of what they consume and utilize local resources as much as practical. Also, local manufacturing closer to the consumers will provide a stronger incubator for product development and innovation and enable faster and more flexible response to our consumers. Raw resources traded for the nations that need them and their consumption within their own economies would not be disadvantaged. Other trade outside of the trade bloc would be reviewed to ensure that it is deemed necessary trade to support demand that cannot be met locally in the short term. Knowledge trade involving intellectual property must be traded in a far more equitable manner. Now, if the USMCA followed this true trade bloc agenda, it would need to import very little from outside of the trade bloc zone. And if this trade model were applied as much as practical on a global basis, it would offer a significantly better balance of economic and ecological sustainability across the whole globe. So global trade must become an option of last resort rather than a duplicitous, redundant, wasteful, and destructive free-for-all we've seen so far. Now, in some manner, this is a return to regional trade blocs that existed before the explosion of the global trade herd behavior of the early 2000s. Now, trade consultants have generated onshore versus offshore balanced sourcing models that have correctly predicted that for a wide range of commodities, the USA and other mature economies are at the reshoring tipping point. The balanced sourcing model cost drivers include labor rates, transportation, and a significantly better understanding of the many hidden costs such as quality and the other cost deltas of support for long supply chains. So it's now much more certain that globalized manufacturing is far less cost effective and sustainable now that the total costs are better modeled and understood. Many industries have ran the numbers and are now actively planning to reshore product. Now, be aware that the calculations in the balanced sourcing model are complex, and the only way to make a correct balanced sourcing decision is to run the numbers on a specific product sourcing situation. But in principle, the tipping points for most products is now very close. And so most businesses should carefully run the numbers before they just assume that offshoring into a long supply chain is always cheaper. So what's the logic behind these balanced sourcing models? Well, when we apply lean thinking to the supply chains, it's clear that just how much waste can be liberated by relocating to a shorter and localized supply chain with significant benefits in high double-digit waste and cost reduction. Typically, up to 80% of waste can be eliminated, as well as lead times, inventory, and operating costs that can be significantly reduced. So next, let's look at all of the different types of inventory and how they are attracted to a supply chain. Now, accountants like to class inventory as an asset, but as we're going to show, it attracts significant waste and non-value adding costs. Global supply chain, all these inventory types and the associated transactions are typically required.
As we reduce the length and complexity of the supply chain, we can both eliminate and reduce the types of inventory and the associated transactions, and also the support effort necessary to run a business. There are many advantages of shorter, local, and less complex supply chains, and these benefit everyone: business, national citizens, and their governments. A supply chain cost trade-off is typically between the lowest cost of labor versus the cost of operating the supply chain. And in 2012, an offshore source was the lowest cost solution across a range of products, even though they had a large range of physical size and labor content. And by 2015, only 3 years later, the tipping point had moved and forced reshoring of products with large physical size, such as refrigerators and heavy equipment, closer to consumers, as the offshore lower labor costs could not offset the global shipping costs for the large volumes of the product. The near future prediction is that the tipping point will favor a local and shorter supply chain across a wide range of products for reasons we will explain next. Now, although there are many reshoring tipping point costs to consider, the two prime cost drivers are delta labor cost versus the delta supply chain cost, including the inventory cost. So the cost of supply chains has been rising and is now accelerating upward with the more recent increase in interest rates, while the labor cost delta has been steadily reducing between offshore low-cost countries and local Western labor costs as these LCCs continue to gain more prosperity. And this will further decline and more rapidly with the utilization of Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is a key lever to enable a take-back manufacturing environment. And as we will show, it can eliminate any advantage of low-cost labor and improve the reshoring tipping point. Industry 4.0 involves the introduction of cyber physical systems within and into the manufacturing process. Cyber physical involves the connecting of computers directly to the manufacturing processes without the need for human intervention. It employs new disruptive technologies such as advanced robotics and sensor technology, integrated connectivity, and the ability to provide artificial intelligence such that the total process knowledge can be applied at the point of use in real time. Here is an explanation of how the application of Industry 4.0 aids the reshoring transition. When the labor hours in the product are very high, the offshore capability using low-cost labor may have an advantage over local and more expensive labor, even when traded with the cost of long offshore supply chains. But as the product labor hours are reduced using Industry 4.0, the offshore low-cost labor advantage diminishes, and the higher long supply chain costs push the decision toward reshoring. So it's clear from this chart that the more labor effort can be removed from the product and services with automation technology or smart design or lean thinking using an Industry 4.0 approach, then the more likely the tipping point will define a reshoring solution. So the latest balanced sourcing models are predicting that most supply chains will support a reshoring decision, and 85% of the large corporations are now looking to reshore to the USMCA trade bloc environment. Now, although the recurring costs show an advantage for localized manufacturing, a challenge of undertaking recapitalization exists so that we can build back the manufacturing and infrastructure capacity that has been allowed to decline in most Western nations.
Now, in Canada, in the last 20 years, we've seen at least a 20% decline in national capital investment, with almost all of that decline in the value-adding parts of the economy, such as industry and related infrastructure, with housing and other more rent-seeking investments growing as a portion of the current levels of investment. This has looked like a going out of business plan, and this situation will need to be reversed with fresh political will and a focused set of industrial policies to reinstall investment confidence.
The concept of reshoring has been talked about for a long time, and these balanced sourcing models are now available to assist businesses run the numbers. And here's a typical comparison between the earlier offshore scenario and 5 years later when the offshore costs had escalated past the tipping point. The model uses costs of labor, overhead, logistical support, and any environmental costs. Some of the movement toward a tipping point was because in the past businesses underestimated the actual cost factors in supporting a very long supply chain in different time zones in a different culture. Also, the cost of quality and inventory shrinkage were some of the factors that needed to be reevaluated and budgeted much higher. This has moved many businesses more toward an early reshoring solution.
So by 2020, many businesses were certainly evaluating the reshoring option or actively moving towards reshoring. Into the future, we see this local manufacturing advantage being maintained, even if new low-cost countries with ultra-low labor rates are added to the offshore supply chains. Any tariffs or other local trade barriers or technology or increasing cost of inventory will add to the localized manufacturing closer to the customer advantage. However, not all products will have the same rate of movement toward the reshore tipping point, so it remains important to run the numbers. So, in summary, this reshoring strategy will ensure that where possible, we move to a localized trade supply chain model and make much more of what we consume with much more of our own resources.
Many factors are now forcing a change in trade structures from liberalized global trade towards more regional trade blocs. And the political driven initiatives will be driven by both citizen dissatisfaction with low prosperity and more directly via geopolitical changes that will force deglobalization. In parallel, business initiatives will drive reshoring due to the cost advantage of local rather than long global supply chains. This reshoring journey will require local recapitalization to rebuild the local supply chains and will also demand support for new infrastructure. There will also be a need to be focused on retraining the citizen population to improve their ability to become manufacturers again. This journey to take back manufacturing will need firm, focused, and well coordinated efforts between government, the educational institutions, and industry support organizations. They will need to undertake a common roadmap that follows three parallel imperatives. Our Canadian national government must develop new industrial policies and plans that are far better aligned with the North American USMCA trade bloc partners. The USMCA trade bloc partners together must form a working coalition that creates a unified social contract with a focus on a no-nonsense productivity and prosperity agenda. The goal will be to move away from a global free-for-all and minimize wasteful global trade, resource waste, and environmental pollution.
We must all agree that the notion of a post-industrialized society just won't work for us. Building an economy around just services while also supporting significant levels of imports, even if you have resources to trade with, is clearly not the way to get prosperity. Since 1980, globalization has increased 8 times, but global prosperity has only increased at best
3 times. So globalization has been a poor creator of wealth, but really good at transferring it from the West to the rest. So the direction is to make much more of what we consume rather than continue to import them. This means we will and must minimize the need for imports and ensure we export resources or products or services with far more value. We need a balanced economy of resources, manufacturing, and services. The USMCA will need a long-range energy plan with nuclear power as the main thrust to support industry and electrification of our modern society so that we can reduce unnecessary pollution and improve energy security. Also, short to long-term energy strategies, including oil and gas, must be developed, including transnational pipelines to ensure overall continental energy self-sufficiency. Now, we must avoid the significant use of wind and solar as it is proved to be both unreliable and non-cost effective for use on a modern energy grid. The motivation for moving away from the ongoing economic security of fossil fuels is driven by fear of the impact of the release of CO2 into the atmosphere, creating a dangerous climate emergency. And this has been the position of the UN IPCC, and this has become the settled science by the environmental movement, the media, and all of the Western governments, with significant policies moving vast amounts of our wealth toward a goal of net zero. But many economists are concerned about net zero's negative effect on global prosperity. Now, many scientists dispute this climate emergency position and declare that the net zero journey is unnecessary, technologically unattainable, and economically unviable. So, we recommend that much more debate must be undertaken so that our future energy policies and technologies are better balanced between any environmental risk and the need for the recovery of our prosperity. Now, so far, none of these issues and solutions already mentioned gets noticed by a continuously distracted and unresponsive Canadian government. They worry far too much about who we are rather than how we are doing. And this situation must change very soon.
We need to change the culture of our educational system from a focus on selling education and knowledge to the highest global buyer and more toward a citizen-centric integrated industrial learning system. This learning system must serve all age ranges of our population so we can relife our workforce. And this must include a better focus on basic literacy and a STEM syllabus across all levels of education, as it's clear that the current over-social liberalized education agenda is failing our citizens. Now, we have significant youth underemployment, and we have the erosion of even the basic skills in your general population. And this is going to prevent us from participating as a modern industrial workforce. The current educational environment consists of siloed educational institutions that do not adequately integrate training and work experience into their learning process. The proposed integrated industrial learning system will create an integrated and planned process of ongoing education, training, and work experience activities that are administered by a central controlling body. Also, this new learning system will provide counseling, aptitude testing, and induction very early in the career journey. In other words, rather than send our youth to school and then hope they eventually find a job, we introduce them far earlier into the industrial or business environment, and this will provide an integrated learning process of education, training, and industrial experience so that they gain the opportunity for a worthwhile career. The integrated industrial learning system must also be made available to mature citizens that want to upgrade their skills and employment capability even while they are already employed in a full-time job. And this can be done by using planned day release and night school programs. It's clear that the public image of manufacturing needs work. It's still perceived as dark, dirty, dangerous, deafening, difficult, and smelly and highly unstable as a career. We need to change this image so that everyone views manufacturing as something to build their future upon. To achieve this, we must deploy knowledgeable industrialists into our educational systems to re-educate everyone, including the frontline educators who may not have a good grasp of manufacturing as a career. Also, our politicians and our government in general need a far better understanding of how manufacturing works and how it benefits our economy and our society. This is a must, and we are talking a culture change in our society about the value and respect for manufacturing. We must educate everyone. As we just said, we must change the image of manufacturing. We need solid PR by a much more supportive media with close coordination with the industries, the educational institutions, and government. We must take such action to attract young people toward manufacturing careers to combat the increasing skill shortages. This is where the industrial integrated learning system will be essential, including the early career counseling and induction process within our schools. We need our youth to start to see industry as cool so that a new maker culture can emerge so that we can rebuild a modern industrial workforce. To take back manufacturing, our industries must run the numbers on the cost of supply chains to confirm per commodity and for each product that shorter and local supply chains are least cost to their business. This should then promote a significant reshoring initiative across almost all industrial sectors. Now, lean productivity improvement must return as a focus to ensure local industrial capacity is far more productive. An Industry 4.0 automation strategy must become the main investment focus across North America, and the financial institutions must assist our governments in an investment plan for the long-term restoration of manufacturing using these strategies. Also, local communities must be supported so that they are better aligned to undertake the industrial growth. Due to this Industry 4.0 approach, we will need far less labor to drive productivity and growth, and therefore we will need far less immigration. And any future immigrants must come with firm employment offers and come ready with the required education, training, experience, and communication skills. Another reason for less immigration is that if we apply Industry 4.0 and lean practices to the somewhat bloated public sector, we can liberate a significant level of labor and redeploy these resources to the private sector to gain a much needed improvement in overall national productivity. So to summarize, if these three parallel imperatives are correctly coordinated and implemented by government, the educational institutions and industry, with support from the financial sectors, then it will be possible to take back manufacturing and gain back our prosperity for all.
Now, the TBM book includes a detailed roadmap and predictions for how to take back manufacturing and how it may happen. But here is the latest outlook we see happening in the next few years.
Now, reshoring has started. The 2022 report from Thomas Industries declares that 85% of corporations are pursuing a reshoring strategy, with reshoring trends showing an average 50% year-over-year growth rate. However, we still have much more to do. Until recently, most economists embraced global free trade ideology with almost religious fanaticism, even when it was clear that it was not working for a large segment of the Western population. But now some economists admit that there may need to be a significant reset. And a recent article, The New Productivism Paradigm by Danny Roderick, demonstrates this welcome change in economic ideology. And it explains that we're moving from the disaster of financialization, consumerism, and globalism toward production, work, and localism. So in many ways, this is the exact change in economic direction that I've been suggesting in the TBM book and what I've been describing to you here.
So it just goes to show that in economics, lean thinking wins every time.
well, eventually. And if we listen to the geopolitical expert predictions, we may not have any choice but to take back manufacturing, as globalization may just not work anymore. This will be due to a breakdown in global trade security and a deterioration in East-West relationships that may fracture the capability and disable global free trade. Also, even more important, global consumer workforce demographics will mean that into the future, our largest consumer market and best labor pool will be within our local USMCA trade bloc environment. And this certainly reinforces the need to take back manufacturing. It's now clear that many Western democracies will be voting in new governments, and they're going to be much more concerned about prosperity and improving productivity, as well as setting new policies to have a far greater control of foreign trade and imbalance. And they're going to be encouraging business to refocus on lean and Industry 4.0, and will work at solving the industrial investment challenge by adjustments to taxation. And they're going to be undertaking a reduction and redeployment of the bloated public sector back to a more productive and expanding private sector that will demand the implementation of an integrated industrial learning system for both youth and mature workers within the citizenship. And that may reduce the need for further immigration. And the approach to climate change and the adoption of net zero and its impact on prosperity will generate a lot of debate and policy review. Now, in many ways, the future will mean going back to the pre-globalization era of less global trade and a much more integrated and localized industrial environment organized into enforced trade blocs. And it's clear that the notion of the Western nations moving to a post-industrialized society via globalized manufacturing was a huge mistake, which we will now have to reverse and recover from. So my book explains in far more detail what we must do to gain back a sustainable prosperity in the Western economies, and my website and these links provides additional resources on the subject. And so now I'll be delighted to take any questions. Thank you.